From the very beginning of our lives until the end of our lives, we have those points, those places at which we arrive. Often they're called developmental milestones. And they're really important for us in our personal development, our development in social settings, those kinds of things. For a good example of that, think of a child who is just beginning to learn to walk. How they will hold on to things, they will pull up, they will walk around, they'll hold on, and then someday, they will let go and they'll take a couple of steps. And they'll be so excited that they fall. That's usually what happens with developmental milestones. We arrive and then all of a sudden we kind of fall. But we have them throughout our lives. Various things that we do. You know, that first day of school. Remember that? Or the first time you stayed home overnight by yourself. Big times in our lives, and often those times are preceded by anxiety and fear. Can I do this? Will I succeed? Will I fail? Probably all of them are yes. And then there are those times that may not be quite developmental milestones, but they come with that same pattern, that same thing of being anxious and fearful. The big thing's about to happen. I had one of those experiences as I started my second freshman year of college. It took you a minute. You see, I didn't make the developmental milestone the first time. And I had to make a decision, and I don't understand, but you know, I started that first freshman year as a pre-dentistry major. I know. At least priests don't use Novocaine. And then that didn't work out, obviously, and so I started my second freshman year as an engineering major. And that's probably funnier when you see my second year calculus grades, but I decided I needed to do something, but I was caught in the midst of this whole thing of what am I going to do? And how am I going to be? Well, the second freshman year was at a small church college, 2-year college. And when I started there, I became close to 3 professors, or three staff people there. The first was the college president, that was his freshman year too. He started as I started my freshman year. And so we had something in common. He had been a missionary. And then I became very close to the college chaplain. And then very close to the Bible instructor there as well. You see, in this wrestling about who I was and who I was going to be and how I would live out my life, I had been raised as a Christian fundamentalist, and I had come to the decision in my life as a teenager, somewhat vocally, that wasn't for me. And that if that's what it meant to be faithful, I wasn't going to be faithful. So I was searching, trying to find who I was going to be. And one part of that had nothing to do with faith. I didn't want anything to do with it. But in these 3 men in my life, I found 3 people who demonstrated to me and who taught me that I could be faithful, but not in the way I thought I had to be. I could be different than that and still be faithful to God and live out that faith in the world. And that was really significant for me. It was an important time in my life. Later, when I would apply to go to seminary, to various schools, they would ask, what was the most significant thing in your life that brings you here? And I would say, these three men. They became the presence of Christ in my life in a way that took me to a new place. A similar thing happens when you and I face death. Be it the death of someone in our lives close to us or as we face our own. But when we find ourselves facing death, we find ourselves facing fear and anxiety about what's going to be ahead. How will our lives be without this person? That's where the disciples found themselves in today's gospel reading. Jesus has told them He's going to die. And they've got to be sitting there going, He got us this far. How are we going to get any farther? How are we going to make it without Him? Maybe we'll just give up. Maybe it was all a sham. But Jesus says to them, I'm going away, and where I go, you can't come. And not only can't you come there, but I'm going to be here with you, but I'm not going to be here with you. And they had to have been sitting there going, what in the world does He mean? We call that theological gobbledygook. In and of itself, it really doesn't make any sense. And then He says, peace be with you. My peace I leave with you. After 2 years, I left that little college. It was a 2-year college. They didn't ask me to leave. And I went to a university, and I became pastor of 2 Methodist churches. While I was there, I was a student pastor, and it was tough. I got to tell you, it was tough. Before I went, one of the churches, the main church, had this debate. Do we want they couldn't afford a full-time pastor, so do we want a student pastor or do we want a retired pastor? And about 49% wanted a retired pastor and about 51% wanted a student pastor. So it was a difficult situation. And there were times when I wasn't sure. I was 19 years old when I went there. 20 years old. I wasn't sure what this meant for my life, my faith, my desire to be whatever it was I was going to be. And in the lowest of those times, I would hear one of these 3 men in my head. Or I might even go down and sit down and visit with them. They got me through that difficult time that I found there. And it was with them that I was able to do that. And to this day, 2 of them are dead. But to this day, there are times that I hear each of their voices and I see their faces. Have you ever had times like that for yourself? Do you have someone in your life that does that for you? A friend, a parent, or mentor, someone who has that significance in your life that you hear their voice or see their face even though they may not be here? If you do, you have an understanding of what happened with those disciples when they saw Jesus and heard Him say this. Will Willimon tells the story of a friend of his who in middle age decided it was time to learn to fly. We tend to do those kinds of things in middle age, don't we? And he said that from the very first lesson, he had this great, intense fear of the day when he would get in the plane and his instructor would be next to him and his instructor would give him some instructions and then he would say, "I'm getting out. It's your turn to fly on your own." And he said the really funny and strange thing that actually happened when that day came was that as he sat there and went through the checklist that he had to go through, he did so with the voice of his instructor who wasn't sitting in the plane. And he said, "I was good with it. I was fine." That, my friends, is what Jesus offered to his disciples. "My peace be with you. I'm not here with you, but I'm going to be here with you." And it's the same thing that he offers to us. That in those times and in those places when things seem lean and difficult, his voice is there in the voices of those mentors and friends and faces who appear in our minds. He is there in our hearts as we struggle with who we are and how we will be. And as we enter into those difficult social problems that we may face on a daily basis. To put it quite simply, what Jesus says in this gobbledygook that is in front of us is nothing other than, don't be afraid. I am always with you. My peace is with you. And for that, I am grateful. Amen.